In the previous video, we established the fact that the taxpayer qualifies for the child tax credit, which has a max credit of $2,000 and it's a non-refundable credit. But portion of this $2,000 could be refundable type of credit through what's called the additional child tax credit. The refundable has a max of $1,400. Phase out starts at the AGI level of $200,000. If it's married filing jointly, then it's $400,000. In this problem, Samantha makes much less than that, right? Much less than $200,000 in AGI. So no worry about the phase out reduction of the credit here. Question: will Samantha get the max of $2,000 in child tax credit? That's what we need to find out. The child tax credit amount must be input in line 13 of Form 1040. Let's see that. Here's Form 1040 on page 2, line 13A. 13A is child tax credit or credit for other dependents. So child tax credit is a max of $2,000, or if it doesn't qualify for child tax credit, it could be credit for other dependents, which is $500, and we would populate in line 13A. Let's see how much this taxpayer qualifies for the credit. To do that, we need to fill out this worksheet. And in the header of this worksheet, we see line 13A, and it's part of the instructions. Doesn't have to be filed with Form 1040. As you see here, it says keep for your records, but we need to go through it to determine how much we could get the credit for and report on line 13A. So let's start. Number 1, the number of qualifying children under age 17, just one, right? Her daughter Tabitha. So 1, and the max is $2,000. That's what we input in number 1. Number 2, it would be $500 if the qualifying child does not qualify for this child tax credit, could qualify for the other dependent, which is $500, and that's what we would put in line number 2. But in this case, we leave it blank. There's no qualification for that. Number 3, sum up of line 1 and 2, so that's the $2,000 carried down. Line 4, enter the amount from Form 1040 line AB. What is line AB? That's, recall, it's AGI. Why is it relevant here? Because recall that the child tax credit is subject to a phased out of $50 reduction for each $1,000 of AGI above the threshold of $200,000, $400 if married filing jointly. So that's why we need to show the AGI here on line 4. And then line 5 is the threshold, $200,000 if it's all other filing statuses besides married filing jointly. Number 6 is ask us if line 4, the AGI, is more than line 5, the threshold. The answer is no, so we leave blank. And then we go to line 7. Line 7 multiplies line 6, which is blank, by 5%. And that would be 0. You come to line 8. Line 8, is the amount on line 3 more than the amount on line 7? The answer is yes. So subtract line 7 from line 3 and we get $2,000. At this point, we have determined the child tax credit could possibly be $2,000 and it's not subject to any phased out. But remember, the key is possibly. We have to see if we can use all this $2,000 for the credit. In line 8, it states go to part 2. Right now, from part 1, we know that we have $2,000 of child tax credit that we can use. But first, in part 2 here, we need to know what is our tax liability, amount of tax owed, and what other credits are being applied to this tax liability before we apply the child tax credit and then the additional child tax credit if all of that is applicable. So line 9, we have to input the amount from Form 1040 line 12B. And line 12B is the tax liability, $1,550. And then in line 10, we list out all of the credits that's being used and apply to this tax liability before applying the child tax credit and the additional child tax credit to this remaining tax liability. Here's Schedule 3. It's called the Additional Credits and Payments. Part 1 are all of the non-refundable credits. Part 2 are the payments and refundable credits. Refundable credits are like payments, so that's why it's grouped together with other payments. Let's go to Part 1, non-refundable credits, and take a look. In line 2, credit for child and dependent care expenses, and attach Form 2441. We've done that in a previous video. The result of that credit is $750, and we had reported this here on line 2. Now we carry this amount over to the worksheet for line 13A. Back to the worksheet. On line 10, we need to report the amount that was from Schedule 3, line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4. There were none besides line 2, which is $750, the child dependent care credit. And then the total input $750 here. Line 11, answer to the question is no. And so we need to subtract line 10 from line 9. This is taking the line 9, the tax liability, and subtracting the $750, the amount of credits. So the remaining tax liability is $800. As it states in line 12, this is the child tax credit and credit for other dependents, but we don't have none, so all of this is the child tax credit. And it also says enter this amount on Form 1040, line 13A, which is the purpose of doing this worksheet, right? Furthermore, it says in this section, you may be able to take additional child tax credit on Form 1040, line 18B, if you answer yes on line 11 or line 12 above. Did we answer yes? We did. Therefore, we may be able to qualify for the additional child tax credit. So then we have to complete Schedule 8812 to figure any amount of additional child tax credit. The tax liability, line 12A, is $1,550. We don't have any from Schedule 2, none in this problem, so therefore $1,550 is carried down to line 12B. Then 13A is the child tax credit, which we have determined to be $800. And from Schedule 3, line 7, that's $750 from the child dependent care credit. And $750 plus $800 is $1,550. Line 14 then is 0. Line 15 are the taxes not applicable in this problem, so that's 0 or blank. Line 16, the total tax at this point is 0. Why is it 0? Let's review. Go to line 12A, that's $1,550. That's the amount of tax. We looked up in the tax table and determined that's the tax liability. We later completed line 13A worksheet, the worksheet for child tax credit, and determined that we can use $800 out of the applicable $2,000 of child tax credit. Why is it only $800 when we have $2,000 to use? Well, our tax liability is $1,550. But then we initially applied the child and dependent care credit, which we know from completing Form 2441, and we get the balance there to populate Schedule 3, line 7, the $750 of child and dependent care. So $750 applied to the tax liability of $1,550, we have remaining balance of only $800 of tax liability, and we can only apply the child tax credit, a non-refundable credit, $800 to it, even though we have $2,000 to use, but we could only apply $800, and therefore our total tax end up being 0. So we have again $1,550 in tax liability, but we were able to apply 2 credits. One is the child and dependent care credit, $750, plus another $800 to use from the child tax credit. Therefore, our total tax is 0. Now, back to the child tax credit of $2,000. We had used $800 here for the child tax credit, the non-refundable portion, but then we still have remaining balance. Is that correct? The remaining balance is how much? It's $1,200 of remaining balance. And there is something called additional child tax credit, which is a refundable credit. And that is in line 18B right here. Additional child tax credit. It is a refundable credit. Everything in line 18, 18A, 18B, C, and D are refundable credit. And we have a remaining balance of child tax credit that can be refundable credit. We call this the additional child tax credit. And we can use a max of $1,400. But how much do we have remaining? $2,000 minus $800. We have $1,200 remaining. Let's go to Schedule 8812. Here's Schedule 8812. Must be filed with Form 1040 if there's additional child tax credit being claimed. Don't forget name and social security on these types of schedules. In line 1, it's going to be $2,000. That's the amount of child tax credit. Then in line 2, we see $800. What is the $800? That's the amount of applied child tax credit. Then we have remaining balance or unused balance of $1,200. That could be the additional child tax credit. Line 4 is the threshold, the amount limitation for the additional child tax credit. It cannot be more than $1,400. That's why we show on line 4. Line 5 is the smaller of line 3 or line 4, and so it's $1,200. It is smaller than the threshold. Line 6A is the amount of earned income. Why is earned income relevant and we need to report in line 6A? Let's take a look at the book. The book states that there are 2 limitations. The first limitation is that the additional child tax credit cannot exceed $1,400 per child. We already know that, right? The second limitation is that the refundable child tax credit cannot be more than 15% of the taxpayer's earned income less $2,500. That's why in line number 7 it asks, is the amount on line 6A more than $2,500? And then if yes, subtract $2,500 from the amount on line 6A. Then in line 8, multiply the amount on line 7 by 15%. And we get $4,425 on line 8. We would select the lower of the 2. That's why in line 8, we check off yes if line 8 is equal to or more than line 5. Then skip part 2. Enter the amount from line 5 on line 15. Here's line 15, $1,200. This amount then is carried over to line 18B as per instruction here. 18B reports the additional child tax credit. And remember, this additional child tax credit is a refundable credit. Let's go back to the Form 1040. $1,200 from Schedule 8812 is reported, carried over to line 18B. Additional child tax credit. This again is a refundable credit, meaning that okay, balance of tax is 0, but then we could get this $1,200 refunded, meaning money paid from the government to the taxpayer. Another credit called the Earned Income Credit, also a refundable credit, is relevant in this problem, and that needs to be populated in line 18A.